Welcome, Robert Dick. Thank you so much for joining me here this morning with the Flutarians, and thanks for that little flute music. Was that an improvisation right there?
Yes. Yes. Who on earth would want to or could memorize that?
Well,
especially when the spirit of that music has its spontaneity, and the whole process of memorizing something, which is completely valid, but it gives a whole different energy sense to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I knew the areas I was working in, and, I know what happens in these different overtone matrices, but, just like a drummer who knows a lot of patterns very well, but, is going to continuously use them in hopefully original ways. And I just noticed something. And it's time to feed my computer.
Oh, well, yes, do make sure we've got some energy input.
Yes. I can energize the music, but I can't energize the machine.
Well, I think I probably I was given your book or recommended your book when I was tone development through extended techniques right here. I think I was probably 15 or 16, and I had just moved from a small town in Texas to Houston to attend the High School for Performing and Visual Arts. And I studied with Jennifer Keeney while I was there, and she knew that I was starting to improvise and branch out from maybe praise and worship style church music to classical style improvisation or free improvisation. And I was just trying to play these new pieces of music that sometimes called for multiphonics and things like that. And so that year that I discovered your book and even just started attempting anything in here, probably I think we started on pitch bends, my tone just bloomed that year. And so I credit your book and the guidance of Jennifer for a lot of that kind of puberty in my flute playing.
Well, thanks. That means a lot to me. When I was doing the original edition of that book, I did all of the graphics myself. And if you look carefully, you see there's several different styles of note heads and stuff like that, because there's several generations. But the original one I did, um, ruling the staves myself, applying the clefs and the notes with something that I'm not sure even exists anymore. It's called letraset. It was like a rub-off thing. You put it over the spot and you rubbed it off, and then it stuck on there. And of course, if the stem wasn't straight, you had to grapple with that. And anyway, I was living in this loft in New Haven, and $75 a month.
Wow.
It was the classic artist garret, cold water only, no shower. Everywhere I went, I took a towel. I would visit my friends and say, "Could I take a shower?" I went to the Yale gym a lot in that period because I could take a shower there, and I'd be working on this and working on it. You go like, I hope somebody cares about this stuff somewhere or sometime. I really do. You know, it's so that was almost 50 years ago, and it is endlessly gratifying to me when I hear people say, it actually helped. Those are the exercises that I did to build my own sound. And the original edition did not have any of the throat tuning stuff. That came later, but it started with the harmonics.
So when was the original edition published? I think this one says 86. Okay.
Yeah, 1977 was or 78 was the original edition actually saw print.
Wow.
Through a now defunct publishing company called Edutainment Music.
Well, I love that phrase. I'm constantly making edutainment.
Yeah, well, Edutainment was run by a real huckster who ripped everybody off.
Oh, no.
And it's a whole epic story, which we might not have time for here, about how I took him to court and persevered. And the day arrived when I had recovered the copyright to this book. That was the most important thing. And entitled to the unsold stock. And suddenly, I was in the publication business myself. And I don't see the point, unless you're writing, bestsellers, of really going with a publisher per se, because you can do it yourself, and the technology. I mean, all this stuff, tone development through extended techniques predated the personal computer. And the works that came before it, the other flute, was completely handmade by me. And I recovered the copyright from Oxford University Press, although that was done without any legal wrangling because they are an ethical company. And I always joke about Oxford Press. When you get a letter from them, on the letterhead it says something like, since 1443. I mean, they go way back. And what does it actually mean? Whoever you are, and whatever your problem, you shall be going away, and we shan't.
Wow. Well, gosh, that already starts to answer some of my question about what's the origin story of the book. But now you're opening up this. It sounds like as a result of your debacle with edutainment, that it opened a whole new chapter in your life, right?
It did.
So,
it really did.
Would you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, when there was this debacle, I started to learn about what's actually involved in publishing. And I realized that much of what I've been told about, how difficult it was and how much skill you had to have and experience was nonsense. It was perfectly learnable. For example, on the back of the book, there's an ISBN number. Well, they can get an ISBN number. You can get an ISBN number. They can find a printer. You can find a printer. And I also looked around. You see, the most important thing in life, I feel, and the most interesting thing in life is other people. Other people have done incredible things, and they're doing incredible things all the time. And I realized, look, I'm not the first person in the universe to have to grapple with self-publishing. Who else is out there, and what do they know? Well, there was a composer whose name is going to pop out of my mouth in just a little bit, but his publishing company was called Dantalian Music.
Okay.
And I found out who his printer was. This is a guy who was enormously methodical, enormously, relentless, and he found the best and least expensive printer. So I called his printer, who turned out to be incredibly helpful. They sent a representative to my house several times to help me get it together. They were great.
Cool.
They can find a distributor. You can find a distributor. I made some mistakes along the way, but eventually worked it out. And in the end, who actually does the work? The creative work is the biggest part of the job.
I was just thinking a moment ago about all of the cutting and pasting I'm sure you literally did in the process.
Oh, yes. Now, of course, that's all digital. But yes, like learning how to use a non-photo blue pencil, things like that. They're things that, really don't apply anymore, but you really did need to know. And it's all learnable, that aspect, but the real work is the creative work. And if you go through the traditional route with a publisher, that's the part that is least reimbursed. The value, every once in a while, you get somebody who says, well, your book was only 54 pages. Why does it cost $25? And I said, well, it's not the pages you were buying. It's the ideas that are on the pages. That's what you're buying. It's not the paper. Although if you want to go through all the facts and figures, you'd be surprised at how much more it costs than you think it does. And so one of the things I realized very early on was that most performances of new music were dreadful. It's still true, but it's better than it used to be. People playing the Barrio Sequenza, for the most part, still sound horrible. And I teach density 21.5 at masterclass after masterclass, a tune from 1936, and people still need the lesson. And I thought, well, and then we get to really challenging music. Well, sequenza is a very challenging piece. Um, and, when I first published my piece, Afterlight, I mean, the first time I heard it played by someone else, I thought, I don't know if this was actually a smart move to publish this. If
It's a tough
that's
position
what's
to
going
be
to
in.
happen to it, because it was unrecognizable. It was, and then, well, I thought, all right, you got to start somewhere. That's where it started. I thought the problem is that the entry point is all virtuosic. That's where the doorway is. Now, how are, okay, there are a few maniacs like me out there in the world who will catapult themselves up there. And I have to say that in the course of my development as a flutist, I had every advantage. I grew up in New York City. I had extraordinarily good teaching in the classical manner. My teaching was great as a flutist. It was not great as a musician. But I was never asked to do anything by ear, for example, and but I got to study with Henry Zlotnick, who maybe you know has not heard of anymore, but this was a student of Barrère, the piccolo player in the NBC Symphony and the Sousa Band. I've got one of his piccolos. It played in the Sousa Band, the NBC Symphony, and with me. James Papatsakis, the great teacher from the Boston Symphony, Julius Baker, Thomas Neifinger, and occasional lessons with a number of other people who were really helpful. I got to go to Tanglewood as a high school student, and then later in the fellowship orchestra. And when I was in high school, I had already done orchestrally what most doctoral students are doing in college, because at the High School of Music and Art, we had 5 bands and 4 orchestras. If you clawed your way to the top of that flute pyramid, and you were principal flute in the senior orchestra, you really had to be somebody, at least at the high school age. I was the principal flutist in the New York City All-City High School Orchestra. So, I didn't come from nowhere, and I had my mother was a classical pianist. I heard many great classical recitals growing up. It was a big part of our family life to go to concerts. So I went to Carnegie Hall many times and heard, those Russian home run hitters. I heard Sviatoslav Richter live, and many other great performers, and so I reached the point where I was asking the big question, like, okay, is this all there is? This classical flute repertoire? Is that really all there is?
I'm curious, what age did that start hitting you?
18, 19. Mm-hmm. Like way before most people.
Sure, that's what I would have guessed, though, according to your story, yeah. Late teens.
Well, when I was 19, I was the principal flute in the best student orchestra in the country at Tanglewood. And I was suddenly asking myself, is this all there is? I thought, look, hey, I'm 19. so many of the important and beautiful things in my life are just beginning. But music, the most important thing of all, seems to be circling into this holding pattern, doing the same things over and over. And, I spent an afternoon at the Tanglewood Library, and I looked up the Boston Symphony's programs for the previous 40 years, and there it was, in black and white.
Sure.
And their programming has gotten a lot less interesting now than it was then. There was still, it wasn't all just Bach and Brahms, but, and Beethoven, of course. But, and I also realized, I've got a developing problem here. This person with the stick has got to go. I actually don't want to follow. It doesn't make me noble or brave or anything. It's just like, well, that's just not how I feel about music. And I also spoke with as many of the Boston Symphony players as I could, because, they were us, just further around the cycle.
Sure, yeah.
And I found, and they all understood the mentorship thing. They were nice people. It was easy, at lunch, can I join you?
Right.
And, they were flattered that some student wanted to talk to them. Because I wasn't just talking to the stars, I was talking to, like, anyone who would talk to me. And so I found them a terrifying group of people.
Oh.
Because with some notable exceptions, like Dario Anthony Dwyer was truly a completely dedicated musical artist, 100%. The timpanist Vic Firth, the same. But the overwhelming majority, their eyes lit up when they talked about their hobbies, not music. And when they talked about the orchestra, they complained. And I thought, help me out here. You are in the what symphony? Like Boston. You perform at the what hall, which is considered one of the acoustic wonders of the Western world. You are conducted by these world famous people. The lowest paid member of your group can own their own home in Boston and a summer home at Tanglewood, which is gorgeous. You have time to teach, play chamber music, raise a family, really live a life, and you're complaining. And I thought, if I stay in this group of people, I will go crazy. I'll become just another alcoholic old flute player, and the world's got enough of them. And so I made the decision, and I knew that was probably the most expensive decision I was ever going to make in my life. I was turning my back on what really seemed a very certain pathway to success, that I was going to be the principal flute in some major American or European orchestra and make that kind of money and live that kind of life. And I was going to leave that and see what was going to happen next. And I was right. It was the most expensive decision I ever made. At this point, if you total it up year by year, it's cost me millions. Was it worth it? Yes. But did it hurt? Yes. So,
Wow. Well, thank you for that, for summing it up. To now I'm imagining young Robert Dick at 19 years old and 20 years old, and hearing some of the stories, the emotional elements of your story ring true or echo in parts of my story too. So I can imagine that feeling of, well, what the heck do I do now? Right?
yeah, right. I had made it to the highest platform on the diving board, you know, and instead of just following through on the plan, which was very doable, um, I jumped into space. So I went home and I thought, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, what am I going to do? I've been working on this orchestral thing basically since I was 11 years old, and now I'm 19. In other words, most of my life. You know, take away a couple of years to get out of diapers, and
Right.
and so and I'm glad that intuitively I thought in these terms. What music would make me happiest, rather than what niche can I fit in, what job can I get. You know, to all the young flutists out there, I mean, when people are talking about your career, the one thing they rarely ever talk about is your happiness. That's almost ignored in the equation. And, you know, I have a friend who's an amateur flute player, who's an enormously successful lawyer, he's a millionaire. And he said, well, Robert, you know, there's more than one currency.
Mm.
And in some currencies, you don't have a whole lot. But in other currencies, you are an extraordinarily wealthy person. So I just wish that in the currencies that I'm wealthy, I could buy a house. But and so I thought, I had played a few recitals up to that point, and I thought, well, you know, I actually like doing this flute and piano and these recitals, and I played some unaccompanied recitals, and I thought, yeah, that's what I want to do. And of course, I had been to countless Ron Paul concerts, because Ron Paul came to New York every year, and I went to every concert.
Wow.
Every concert Ron Paul played was a fantastic music lesson and flute lesson. And I saw that he had built this huge audience. I thought, well, okay, let me see if I can do that. Well, I would advise every young person to ask questions. People will be glad to actually share their knowledge. You know, try to ask intelligent questions, and be prepared when somebody gives you their time. But then people, I mean, so many people have been so helpful to me along the way, and nobody can do it all by themselves, and so at in college, I went to Yale for college. I originally thought that I wanted to go to Juilliard, but my parents were having none of that. They were children of the Depression. They just didn't believe you could make a living. Many years later, my mother apologized, she said, you know, we should have had faith in you. We should have believed that
Mm.
whatever you did, you would make it work. But um, my father never did. Um,
So then you went
he
to
said,
Yale for.
yeah, I went to Yale. You couldn't major in performance there. So I was their worst theory of music major possibly ever. I was terrible at it
Huh.
um, because my hearing had formed on the flute. And to this day, my harmonic hearing is not anywhere nearly as good as so many other musicians.
Mm.
Um, and and so while I'm no master of the tonal system, I've made my own harmonies. You know, I made my own harmonic system, um, and and so and the advice I got from James Pompitsakis about going to Yale or in, was this. He said, you know, he was one of the only adults I could trust at that moment. My parents had reached the other adults that I might have asked. And, you know, in terms of, you know, John Le Carre, the crime thriller espionage writer, was said, they're compromised.
Right, that's exactly
And,
what I was thinking when you said that.
yeah, and, but they hadn't reached Papatakis, so he actually told me what he really thought. He said, you know, it may be hard for you to visualize this right now, but in the fullness of time, everybody who's still there will be able to play the flute well. Everybody who's still there will know the repertoire. They'll basically know all the same stuff. And what will the difference be? The difference will be what you have to say. And that will be a direct consequence of who you are. So you have, now, you know, Papatsakis was the main teacher in Boston for a good 40 plus years. And, you know, he was the teacher at the New England Conservatory, also at Harvard, and all those colleges. Everybody in the Boston area who really wanted to be with the best teachers studied with him. And he said, you know, the Harvard students play every bit as well as the New England Conservatory students. In fact, they often play musically better because they're more curious. He said, now, you can spend 4 years in a practice room, or you could spend 4 years going somewhere where you could really develop yourself as a person. And so Papatsakis didn't tell me what everyone else did. Go there so you'll have something to fall back on. I mean, you know, I hope watching this right now, you know, there's some teenagers with fire in your eyes. You don't want to hear anything about falling back, right? You're not going to fall on your butt. If you fall, you're going to fall on your face going forward. And so, and so he wasn't telling me to prepare for failure, which is what everyone else was. He was telling me to prepare for success. Now that rang true, and it was great advice. This pathway may not be for everybody, but it was a really good pathway for me. And the people I met at Yale, who were not, you know, classical music, you know, they weren't in a tunnel, were enormously inspirational, and I learned a lot from them. And it was there that I began to realize that my own creativity was waking up. And so, and turning back to that idea about, well, what would I play in recitals? When I did ask people, managers in the classical world, they made it very clear that there was room for a bunch of pianists. There was room for a flock of fiddlers, I don't know, a cheeseburger of celli, but but one flutist, and his name was Jean-Pierre Paul. And nobody was going to knock him off his pedestal because he really earned it. And he was an absolute master. So, and I thought, well, okay. And Paula Robeson was starting to emerge at the time, playing this cheesy romantic music. But Paula was gorgeous. And she was wearing these spray-on gowns. And, I thought, well, that's not me. On any level. I could never play that music because I can't stand it. And, maybe today a guy could wear spray-on gowns and it could work, but not.
It'll get you a different sort of attention than you were looking for, perhaps, which may have been true then too. Well, but it got her attention at least, right?
And again in the 1970s, it's like a different geological period compared to today, and and besides which, I realized, look, if you are not true to yourself, nothing you do is going to work. There is something that everybody can sense. People can tell if you're bullshitting them. There's always, you can put it over on a few people, who you can play with flashy fingers and they'll be all impressed by that. But that's not going to really build a career. I mean, maybe in heavy metal music where, again, the market is big enough, the audience is big enough that, you can carve out your percentage and, and there are some heavy metal guitarists who've done that. I think they're empty musicians, but man, they've got fingers. And of course, there are great heavy metal guitarists too. And my favorite being Steve Vai, of those who are still alive. And of course, Jimi Hendrix was enormously inspirational to me. But I asked Jimmy Galway once, who's a friend, I said, Jimmy, what do you think of all those kids imitating your records? And he said, I will expurgate, they are out of their minds. If you're not yourself, there is no hope. And it's really true. And that's why, lots of people have tried to be, Jimmy Galway #2. No one's done it because there is no Jimmy Galway #2. There's James Galway. And to be whoever might be next, you've got to be whoever you are. And so I have done my best to be me, and I've also tried to share what I've discovered and learned. The 3 books I've offered to the world as a great sharing of knowledge. The Other Flute, which is still the standard work for composers and as a reference for flutists, Tone Development, and Circular Breathing for the Flutist. I'm midstream now through the 4th one, which is going to be called the Throat Tuning book. And I think I have one more big pedagogical book in me. And that's what it's going to be. and also to provide the rungs in the ladder, and that's what, the HU's flying lessons are about. My most popular music is basically rungs in the ladder music, like Look Out, the Fisher Jumping, and and I've got a big place in my heart for rock and roll.
Rungs in the ladder, like improving your technique and abilities over time. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, so that you could play really challenging music. Um, in I went to the Yale as an undergraduate, and I went on to the Yale School of Music as a composer and not as a flutist. I actually don't have a degree in flute playing. There is no piece of paper anywhere that says I can play the flute. and 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 I did take a few lessons in my second year in graduate school with Thomas Neifinger, and those were transformative. Tom Neifinger was by magnitudes the greatest flute teacher I ever met. I mean, incomparably better as a teacher because he could play it at a very high level, but he could articulate about it too. And he could articulate about music, on a really intelligent level. Had Tom not had the mental illness he had, he would have been one of the true legends. Tom inherited some bizarre thing from it was in his lineage. And today, undoubtedly, the neurotransmitter that was over-transmitting or under-transmitting or whatever the serotonin uptake, or God knows, whatever it was, there's probably something for that today. But there wasn't at the time. And so Tom was in a manic depressive cycle, and he could flip back and forth. It was not fun to be Tom Neifinger. As great a musician as he was, it wasn't fun for him, and ultimately the disease killed him, and he took his own life. I mean, and it was so tragic, but he opened important pathways for me, and also in that period, just by luck, I met the great trumpet player, Cat Anderson, the inventor of scream trumpet player, the legendary soloist in the Duke Ellington Orchestra. Where did I meet him? On a freelance gig playing in the Ice Capades Orchestra. About one or two shows a year that came through New Haven actually had a chair for flute and piccolo. Normally the flute was folded into some saxophone clarinet book. And the contractor liked my playing. And mainly it was my piccolo playing. And again, for younger players, do not neglect the piccolo, because that's where you're going to get your first work. People don't get their first jobs playing principal flute. You get your job down in a section. And if you're a good piccolo player and you've got a really good sound on the piccolo and you can play the thing in tune, that is a very, very employable skill. And at that stage in my career, who was Robert Dick? Some kid.
Well, you've painted set the stage for us beautifully. I'm wondering now about the turning of the tide or the turning of the ship, right? Because now we as flutists know Robert Dick, but then
well, it was 1975, The other flute had just been published like a couple of months earlier. You know, it was my opening salvo to the world, but it, you know, it had come out of the muzzle, but it hadn't landed anywhere yet. So, and I was glad to get the call for the Ice Capades. You know, it was going to be 2 weeks of work. It wasn't going to be musically enriching work, but it ended with a rectangular piece of paper with some numbers on it, and I needed those numbers. So shows like that, there's one rehearsal, the afternoon of the first performance. It's a run-through at full speed. And I had learned the year, this was my second year, or was my second year, and I had learned the first year that go to the rehearsal early. Look through the book, because if there's something you need to practice, you better practice it before the run-through. And in the first year, I got completely lost. And afterwards, the drummer said to me, "Kid," he said, "I can hear you can play. Let me show you how this works." And he, you know, I mean, again, people reaching out with a helping hand. You know, they could have just dropped me like a stone and called someone else. And so there I was early the second year, and the guy next to me taps me on the shoulder. He goes, "Do you know who that is?" So I look around, I see this very smiling, affable, kind of portly black gentleman. I said, "No." He goes, "That's Cat Anderson." And I said, "What's he doing here with us?" Well, it was a point of pride for me that I was always the first person there. That you really had to warm up for this kind of thing, because this was microphone playing, it was going to be loud, it was going to be hard to hear yourself. At the end of the 2 weeks, your embouchure could be pulp, and my intent was to improve. You know, there was something you could do better every night. And so I got there an hour early, and Cat is in his chair warming up. And I waited till he stopped, and I said, "Excuse me, Mr. Anderson, my name's Robert Dick, and I'd just like to say it's an honor to be in a band with you." And he smiled and he said, "I bet you came here to warm up." I said, "Well, I did." He said, "Well, let's get to it." So there was no shortage of space in the New Haven Coliseum to find a spot to warm up. So I, you know, went up. Well, the next night, I showed up an hour and 15 minutes early. Cat was in his chair opening his case. I said, "Hi." He goes, "Robert, right? Isn't your name Robert?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "You know, I was listening to you warm up, and it's clear to me that you can do a lot of things that other people can't do. And you should share that." He said, "I was in that position once, and I just don't feel I made the contribution I could have made." I mean, very heavy words from a very heavy cat. Well, the third night I walked in to the Het Coliseum with Cat an hour and a half early. And I had a fresh copy of the other flute. And he was gassed that I had actually done all that. And now, the Ice Capades is dippy music, a lot of it. There's so many tunes that boom, whoop.
Well, I'm imagining being you and trying to stay focused while watching the fun stuff that's happening on stage.
It wasn't that much that
no fun.
And it was the same every night. Anyway, whoop. Yeah, the trying to stay focused was a big challenge on that job, because it was easy for your mind to wander, and all of a sudden you go like, "Oh no, is this the 53rd measure of rest or the 55th?" You know. And, well, in, as the piccolo player, you own the stratosphere.
Sure.
And every once in a while, Cat put a moon rocket through it. Now, I know how high he played. Cat got into the third octave on the piccolo more than once. And like most trumpet players, will scream like stuck pigs if you ask them to play 2 octaves below that. So, and Cat was a very nice person. I mean, he was interesting to talk to, and Cat had an enormous amount of muscle around his mouth, and I thought to myself, look at that. This guy is so much stronger than other trumpet players. And because of that, he can do all these things they can't do. And when he does the stuff the other trumpet players can do, he sounds so much better than them. And I thought, I'm going to make myself much stronger. I'm going to set myself free by having the strength to do more. And so that's what that's where that whole natural harmonic boot camp chapter came from. And that's what did so much for you. Because if you actually practice those exercises, they will do wonders for your tone. Mm-hmm. And, so whatever circumstance led Cat to have to take this dumb tour, it might have been bad luck for Cat, but it was really good luck for me. And I hope in all the different cities they went to, the Ice Capades, the conductor, the solo trumpet player, and the drummer did the whole tour. And then everybody else got picked up in every city.
Gotcha.
And I'm sure it's still that way. Although it's probably a synthesizer player now.
I would imagine so, yeah.
Yeah.
As well, in addition.
But that's what set me on the pathway. And so the flute world got to know me because I made a huge effort to get to know the flute world over decades. And I met some jazz, not a well-known jazz soloist, but he was a jazz educator. And he told me something, I thought, this is really smart. He said, there are about 3 or 4 publications in my field, and I try to make sure that no issue of any of them comes out without my name in it somewhere. And I made an enormous, sustained effort that no issue of Flute Talk would come out without the name Robert Dick in it somewhere. No issue of the Flutist Quarterly would come out without the name Robert Dick somewhere. Or Pan in England. And over time, that too paid off. And I wrote articles regularly, and eventually they should just be compiled. It would be a whole book in itself. So, if you're deciding that you are going to take an independent path, and these days for every musician, we're all on an independent path. The neutron bomb has hit the infrastructure, and it's the opposite, of course. The buildings are gone, but the people remain. And so all of us have to decide. Now, the bad news is that most of the infrastructure jobs are gone. And, the people out there practicing orchestral excerpts maniacally, well, 1 in 5,000 is going to land that orchestra job. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. If you're looking in a mirror and you see yourself and that the only thing, like, that you've just got to have it is that orchestra job, well, then go for it. Give it your best shot. But at the same time, also think, what are you also going to do before that golden day arrives, if it ever does? I mean, the principal flute in the Philadelphia Orchestra opens up every 35 or 40 years.
Yeah.
Right? Now, in the meantime, there are loads of people who could do the job just as well as the person there. Perhaps even better. But it's not going to happen because he's there doing it great. And so ask yourself, what is the music in your heart? And don't feel that if it's not classical music, it doesn't qualify. If it's music, it qualifies. If it's in your heart, it qualifies. And so whenever I see any kind of music going on anywhere, I'm asking myself, well, where's the flute star? Where's the heavy metal flute star? Where's the praise music flute star? Every once in a while, flipping channels, see these thousands of people jumping up and down. Well, where's the flute player jumping up and down? And so, if that's you, be you. And it's not original advice, but it's the best advice I could give because it's timeless.
I was just reflecting on your advice earlier of saying to young people who especially, or people who are at any point when they're making a change in direction, don't be afraid to ask questions. And I was wondering if you were thinking, as you were saying that, is there some question you wish you had asked then that you didn't?
Interesting. I don't have an instant answer for that. I was a big question asker. And yes, although I wasn't aware of the need for this question, but in retrospect, which is, if I want to project myself into some more mass audience kind of thing, I'm going to need financial backing. I don't have it personally. It's not in my family. So how would I get it? It's an unanswered question for me even today. But again, I'm in my mid-70s, and perhaps this isn't the time to launch on a 20-year plan. Maybe it is, but that is an important aspect of it. And I remember reading an interview with, some female rock star, Kurt Cobain's girlfriend, whatever her name was, still is, I hope. And she was saying she went to Los Angeles, and step one was to get financed. And, I had never been aware that that was a step.
Mm.
And, we're in a capitalist system, and capital is a big issue if you really want to project yourself somewhere. And so I would think that actually studying how capitalists raise capital would provide ideas.
One of my comments in the chat says Courtney Love, I think is the name you were
Yes,
looking for a moment ago.
It was Courtney Love. Thanks,
you. Thomas. That was Thomas. We've got a couple of other comments. Milam is saying, "You're a true artist, so authentic and untamable. No wonder you made such amazing things with the flute and made it evolve so much." Yeah, also some compliments. Thanks. Cheryl says, "My husband and I are looking for a publisher. Glad I watched. Got lots of good info here. Thanks." Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one of my former students is Melissa Keeling, and her little company is called Honey Heart Music, and she does it all through Honey Heart. And you're going to work just as hard whether you give the work to someone else or whether you follow through and do it all yourself. But whatever there is in it will come to you in a much larger proportion if you do it yourself.
Yeah.
Again,
it's like two sides of the same coin, kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, writing a flute book is not the same thing as a Jacqueline Suzanne novel. I'm not going to be on airport tables. We're never going to see, some multimillionaire's book on, how you raise capital, and by that guy who runs Berkshire Hathaway, and followed by right next to Bitch by Jacqueline Suzanne, and right next to that is The Other Flute.
Well, maybe one day before 20 years from now, the Flutarians Live will be big enough to get you some some additional world recognition. To me, you're already a very famous because of within the flute world you're famous. So thanks for taking some time to tell us more about your origin stories.
Well, thank you. Someone I would recommend everybody check out is a guy named Derek Sivers, Sivers. And you can find him at dereksivers.org. And, he's kind of a pundit. He's got great life advice and career advice. And he's a very good writer. He's very simple, very direct, and very thought-provoking. And so, and he's got a newsletter. You can just sign up. And every once in a while we get an email, and he writes about something. You thought, wow, that was thought-provoking. And useful. So again, there's so many people out there who are helping. I'd like to think of myself as one of them. And by the way, Flutarians, if you would like a flute coach who could help you revolutionize your playing, send me an email. Okay? We'll set it up online. It's Robert@robertdick.net.
All right. Yeah, thanks for that recommendation. And thanks for
Yeah.
the invitation to contact you as well. I'll make sure that's in the comments in the group.
Okay.
Just
And now I have a question.
sure.
Uh, where can I get a Flutarians T-shirt?
Oh, you know what? You're actually my second guest to ask that, so I'm gonna have to. I printed 5 of them for myself the year before last when I was just starting, but I'm gonna need to make a place where you guys can purchase one as well, because you can see that it's got a purple flute and a UFO, and it's gonna beam up some flute. The flutarians are here to serenade
Yeah,
you.
XL.
Okay, XL. I did want to weave in just a little bit of my story as well, in that one of the kind of recurring themes in this chat has been this idea of the music coming from you instead of coming out of you as a job. I mean, some of us do it as a job, but you explained how frequently people who are working in an orchestra professionally, they have plenty to complain about as well. And I was in a position where when I was going through music college, I got so burnt out on this concept of, you mean I'm going to spend my 40, 50, 60-hour weeks practicing for something I have a 1 in 5,000 chance at, 1 in 10,000 chance? I don't know. It's not a good gamble, a good something to bet on. And so I got so burnt out, but I still had already invested all that time to get to that skill level. And when I started playing again, people started asking me, where do I teach? And so this group resulted from that, from performing here in Austin and people asking me, complimenting my playing and asking, where do I teach? And I only ever started playing flute again as I was improvising as like a music therapy. My dad's favorite songs would come on. I'd want to sing along, sing my heart out, and I'm a better flutist in my opinion than a singer, and so I'd get my flute and I continued to improve those skills of improvising. And while I can't guarantee anyone a job that's going to pay them a living wage, I can show you a few steps to take to start letting your heart out on your flute. And that is
Well, me too.
useful in so many ways other than
Absolutely.
just the money, right?
Well, yes. Um, and you know, there we don't live in a meritocracy. Um, the people who have done enormous amounts to bring their playing to and their musical expression to an enormously high level are promised nothing. Um, and often, what puts the what pays the rent might have to be something different. And it's we're in a very similar position to the 18th century musician who was completely on his own. In the rare cases, her own too, but in the 18th century, it was almost always his. Um, and I'm being historical, not sexist. And and so today, the flutist, who is overwhelmingly she is on her own. Um, Safety net? What's that? And and so we have to really construct our whole life out of whole cloth. And the most recent development in teaching is that as these various full professors of flute here and there retire, they're being replaced by adjuncts.
Mm.
You know, and even that, one of the last bastions of like real careers is imploding. Um, and Now, again, as the visible doors close, can you see the invisible doors that you could open? Can you, it's all about making your own pathway now. And it has nothing to do with what the flutist was traditionally expected to do.
Hmm.
You know, and, if I could go back in time, I think I would have made much bigger efforts to have been successful in rock. My problem there also was that there was room for one flutist, and he was already there. And his name was Ian Anderson, who was great at it. I mean, that guy really, really knew how to be a rock star. And and he was a great songwriter and a great singer. And so the best thing you can do for your flute playing often is really singing. Mm-hmm. And that's why I'm working on this book on how to really use your voice to develop your flute playing, because it is so true. And if you feel inhibited about singing, I'll be glad to help you get over it. Because you can. And there are a lot of misunderstandings that people have about thinking that it's inborn. Your musical talent is inborn. Your vocal technique is not. It's learned at some point. And I observe this with my own children. I have a son and a daughter who are now 18 and 16. But now their mother is a great musician. And when the kids were really, really little, we encouraged them to sing. And when they first started singing, it was all out of tune. It didn't take very long before what they heard, the feedback loop between what they heard and this little mechanism in their throat developed. And they started to sing in tune. Now, if they went to summer camp and their kids in a circle singing, and my kids were singing nicely, and some other kid who was never encouraged to sing, couldn't sing, it's not because she or he can't sing. It's because it didn't go through those early phases, and it is never too late.
I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, and as a coach, I work with students also from a compositional point of view. Like if we're looking at a Bach sonata, how is this really working and what is really going on here? It's not from the notes to the music, it's from the music to the notes. Mm-hmm. And very few flute teachers do that. None of mine did, really, except Kniffinger. And so, there are simple processes that change your perspective and something that's like, wow, for an hour of practice, I am getting so much more done than I ever did before in my life. And so if you're out there, it's September. I would love to have some new students this year. I hope some of you Flutarians will be glad to come along.
All right. Yeah, so I'll make sure to post the replay in the group as well. I'll be posting a little teaser on my page throughout the week as well. Thank you so much for joining me, Robert. Is there anything else that you'd like to add before we, move on with our Monday morning?
Yeah. Let me add something called Sliding Life Blues.
Please.
Here, I'm going to take my headphones off for this.
I was just talking to a student yesterday about the cracking one ear technique. So you can halfway crack one ear and you can hear your flute, but you can still hear the headphones. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
I guess you're taking them off, huh?
Yeah. I mean, I've got them both open now. But the way, the system works, I can hear you in the phones, but not me. So if I'm just playing, it's like playing with fingers in your ears. So this is a solo for, flutist playing glissando flute. And this is my invention, my baby, the glissando head joint. And sorry, I've been having this cold thing. It's not COVID, luckily.
Bless you.
And it is directly inspired by my deep, deep love of Jimi Hendrix's artistry, and particularly his passion. I mean, is there anyone who played with more intensity than Hendrix? Because he's at the most intense, I believe.
A big round of applause coming from me, also coming from. Thank you so much, Robert Dick, for that private performance for us, exhibiting your glissando head joint and some of those extended techniques as well. Thanks to all my
Yes.
flutarians who've been joining me live, and
Well, well, thank you, Flutarians. And if you want a glissando head joint, send me an email. Okay.
yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much. I really enjoyed speaking with you. And did you make all those carvings behind you?
These I did not. This is a sculpture by Hank Waddell. He's a Central Texas artist done in the style of Louise Nevelson. One of the best compliments I
Yes.
received this year was, "How do I make my virtual background look like yours?" And I said, "Oh, that's not virtual." And I went back and grabbed that little ukulele and played a little bit. So,
Yeah.
if you guys
Yeah.
want some Hank Waddell sculptures, you might be able to get some out of him if you contact me.
Yes. Yeah. I really love outsider art. And one of my favorite artists is a woman named Mary Shelley, just like the person who wrote Frankenstein. Yeah, just one second. And here's a piece by Mary Shelley.
Wow, cool. It looks like it has some 3D texture to it.
It does. It's carved wood. She's got the weirdest sense of space. And while I'm being a proud father, here's one by my daughter.
Beautiful. I was observing it earlier, thinking what kind of bird might it be channeling.
Yeah, well, when you get to be a parent, one of the things is you can see some of your own facial expressions come back at you. I asked her that same question. I said, "Is that like a swan swimming upstream?" Well, she painted this while her mother was improvising on the piano. And so it was my eye roll I got. She goes, "Daddy, it's a note."
Now I see the note, but I think I've been
Yes,
meditating on like a peacock or a swan or something. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Well, thanks for that little peek into your life.
Okay.